it is not the main focus for tonight, for today. So, yes, not tonight. So, somebody just beeped. Instead, we are in the very, very end stage of the book of Deuteronomy, which means we're in the very end stage of the Torah itself. And Moses is once again enjoining upon the people what they need to do. But the people is an interesting phrase. If you just say, ha'am, the people. We throw this term around a lot in so many different contexts. If you say, the people of this great country, what do we mean when we say the people?
We mean the citizens.
Okay, so one option is citizens.
If we say this great country.
But then that would mean not anybody that is a foreigner.
Right. I agree.
So, for example, if you said this new policy is good for the people of this country, does that mean it's good for my wife? My wife is not a citizen. She's from England. She has a green card. She's here legally. Don't worry. But she's not a citizen. So is she part of the people when we talk about the people of this country?
Yes.
Yeah, she's a resident.
She's a resident.
That's different.
That's different. It's not citizen then, right? A resident and citizen is not the same thing, right? A tourist is currently a resident, but not they're male here resident. So, okay, so what are some other definitions that might be the people? And by the way, I'm not saying that this is the wrong definition. I'm just saying it's a definition in a context. But what are some other definitions of the people that might work?
A group of people who share the same historical background, ancestry,
Heritage, right? Because that could be cultural, it could be historical, it could be ancestral. But there's some sort of heritage, right? Which means that this group is together, but the outsiders are not.
The idea of land, language, and culture defines the people.
Thank you, fascism. But yes, there's a reason why when that is metastasized, when it is taken to a cancerous level, it becomes fascism. But land, language, and culture, either individually or collectively, absolutely can be the people, or if I want to be facetious, the Volk of German thought, right? So, but this idea of heritage then creates outsiders, which you'll notice is different than citizens, because there might be people, for example, in this country who have a certain shared heritage, but are not saying that they're part of the same people who don't have that heritage, even if we happen to both be citizens of the same land. Right. So, you could take, for example, if you wanted to talk about the people, or the Jewish people of the United States of America, we have a particular heritage, we have a particular history, we have a particular culture, and that is distinct from the non-Jewish people of the United States of America. And so if people were talking in a Jewish context and they said, well, people really like when we debate important topics, well, those people are a particular category of people. Because there's lots of people generally, that is to say, Homo sapiens with a pulse, who don't like debating important topics. I've had people actually shocked by how much we debate within Jewish communities as a respectful way. And definitely that, not saying that it's right or wrong, but it is a distinction. What else could be the people? Well, how about the one I just mentioned? Do you have a pulse, and are you Homo sapiens?
Yeah,
Anybody living.
that's a broader definition.
Yeah.
That's perhaps as broad as you want to get, right? But then if you say we need to take care of people, does that mean that I here in Orlando need to give as much care and attention to somebody living in Madagascar?
It depends who you ask.
It depends who you ask. Well, I think it may depend on who you ask, but I think we can say that
people, it's a general rule, people are closer to you.
Well, but I think we can say as a general rule, most people don't show the same level of care for people who aren't part of their people.
True.
Right? Most people don't show the same level of care or at least assistance for people who aren't part of their people.
Whether that's family.
However you define it, right? If you say my people are the people who share my heritage, then for the people who don't share my heritage, generally they come at least second on the priority of concern. Right? If I've got $10 in my pocket to give to a worthy cause, and I'm giving it to a cause of my people, then it's going to go for one of these more than others. Usually there is some level of differentiation of who is being involved or who is being targeted by a particular aspect. So in all of this, we can add on additionally, we could add races, we could add genders, we could add socioeconomic, the rich versus poor. There are many different ways to group together people. And they have been used in many different ways, often for good, to get people together who may not have noticed their similarities. Citizens that came from different heritage, people within a heritage, even if they're citizens of different countries, a way to group people together that will often expand their understanding of their collective responsibility and connection. But it can also be used to divide, to categorize, separate, and limit what we feel as a obligation or connection to each other. So when we talk about the Torah being given to Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, who was the Torah given to?
The descendants of Jacob.
Okay, so the Torah was given to, hold on a second, let's go ahead and do the people of Israel. All right, so now we're going to wipe out those generic versions. Am Yisrael could be interpreted to mean biological kids of Jacob. Right. Kids, because it's shorter to write than descendants. Not only one generation, but multi-generation. Right? B'nai Yisrael is talking about literally the children of Israel, Israel being the nickname for Jacob. So therefore, we're talking about the descendants of Jacob. Done.
Well, when they left Egypt, they took people, went with them who were not.
The Erev Rav, the mixed multitude.
The mixed multitude.
Okay.
Yes, so they were, and the Torah was given to them.
So how do we make a description then that includes them and the biological kids of Jacob? All at Exodus. Right? If you came with us out of Egypt, you're one of us now. Right? You're part of B'nai Yisrael. You're Am Yisrael. You're part of the people of Israel, the children of Israel, the nation of Israel. If you were there when we left at the Exodus, does that cover it?
Well.
So Ruth then was not part of Am Yisrael. And therefore, King David's grandmother wasn't either. Wait, was she?
Yes.
Because Ruth was very famously a Moabite. Moabites were living in Moab, not in Egypt when we left, and actually were quite antagonistic towards us as a nation. So does she get to be called part of the people of Israel? Is she part of Am Yisrael?
Yes.
How does that work then?
Because
she aligned herself with Israel. And the
But
people.
that's different than the biological.
But she wasn't biologically. She wasn't at Exodus, nor were her ancestors at the Exodus.
Well, it's like she was adopted. She aligned herself with the people of Israel.
Was
The
that?
God of Israel.
Converts. Okay,
Yeah.
so how does that work then? Is it plus converts? Do we have one real definition and then also them? Or is there a definition that includes converts and everyone else on the same ground?
Well, isn't a convert the same as being born into?
Well, yeah. So having a definition that is this plus them seems a little awkward. It's cumbersome.
Well, when we use the term B'nai Yisrael,
Mm-hmm.
okay, literally we're saying the children of Jacob, okay? But Am Yisrael is more encompassing. I think Am Yisrael is I don't hear other people use the term.
Right, but so
People.
how do we get this into one group,
Well, I think about Abraham,
right?
Eliezer, his servant.
Yep.
Was he part of the house of Abraham? Was he part of his?
Oh, he's part of the house
Yeah,
of, but he was not the inheritor of.
He wasn't the inheritor, but he was considered one of his people
Mm-hmm.
Right.
in a broad sense because he's under the influence of Abraham's God. It's a more encompassing the house
Under the
of-
influence. But we get a fancy word for influence throughout the Torah, and also with Abraham as well, which is they or ancestor. Oh, there's an N there. Ancestor. Accepted covenant.
accepted the yoke of heaven.
Brit, which is exemplified through
Right.
Torah, as he writes sideways, right?
Are we talking about those present at Sinai? Is that what you mean?
Well,
Well-
no, yes and no, right? So that's the thing, is we need a definition of who is Am Yisrael if we are going to, that goes beyond just the moment of Sinai, if we're going to have the usage of the term. Otherwise, it means one and done. There was one generation, and then we don't get to use the phrase anymore. But we use the phrase continuously. So it can't only be the people who were alive at that moment. And it can't only be the people who were descended from the people who were alive at that moment. It has to also include others, but joining around this main topic, which was what did both they and later people who joined do that was the same? They accepted the covenant. They accepted the Brit. Right? So either you inherited that covenant as part of it, or you chose to join that covenant as part of it. But either way, you are now on equal footing as part of the same Am, as being part of the same people. And of course, the written contract of that covenant is called the Torah, which means that it seems to say this is covering everyone. Now, this was a really, really long explanation, but we're going to look at how this actually gets embedded in the Torah, well, at least a couple of ways. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Page 1165. We are in chapter 29, verse 9.
You're right.
1165. No, I'll ask for a volunteer. On Mishnah class, we go around the table in the night because otherwise people get shy. But for this, I'll take a volunteer. Thank you.
You stand this day, all of you, before the Lord your God, your tribal heads, your elders, and your officials, all the men of Israel, your children, your wives, even the stranger within your camp, from wood chopper to water drawer, to enter into the covenant of the Lord your God, which the Lord your God is concluding with you this day with its sanctions, to the end that he may establish you this day as his people and be your God, as he promised you and as he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Okay. Long sentence. Right? Multiple verses to get that one sentence, which is why we talk about verses, not sentences in the Torah. Because one verse could have a couple sentences and one sentence could stretch over many verses. This verse is saying what we were just discussing. Just saying it in more concrete and, well, perhaps direct language, but in a language that is often overlooked by many of the people who are listening or reading the Torah. So look very carefully at what God is saying, right? Or Moses on behalf of God. That everybody is standing before God. Who does everybody include? Everybody, right? So just in case you might have thought that kulchem, that all of you, meant all of you, but not all of you. Well, because the pronouns are unclear, right? Moses goes into detail, right? From the muckety-muck high tribal leaders all the way down to the guy cutting wood, which was like the bottom of the social status scale, right? And it's not only the men, it's also the women, and it's not only the adults, it's also the kids, and it's not only those of you that were the biological group set together, it's also the stranger, the ones that have joined into the group, even if they weren't born into the group, right? Everybody together. Why? For the Brit, for the covenant. Right? All of you came together to have the covenant, and because all of you came together to accept this covenant, what was created, what was established, that you will be his people, right? That you will be an Am, that you will be a nation, and that God will be your God. That's how a covenant works, right? You have the king and you have the subjects. If you don't have a king, you don't have a nation. If you don't have subjects, you don't have a nation, right? A king sitting alone in a tower is king of nothing. And a bunch of people without a leader is also nothing unless they've established some sort of covenant with themselves. And in this particular case, the covenant is between us and God that creates this entity called the people of Israel, right? But it is around this covenant, around this brit, which we also get a reminder of, extends as an ongoing promise that God had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So now we know a little bit more about why this particular group was being targeted for this particular covenant. Making sense? Okay, onward.
I make this covenant with its sanctions, not with you alone, but both with those who are standing here with us this day before the Lord our God, and with those who are not with us here this day.
Wait,
Well-
who? Who? It was like somebody absent?
The future.
Okay, so the general understanding of this, both from Midrash as well as from also parallel texts in ancient treaties of the Middle East, is that this means not only the people who are standing here are bound by this covenant, but the people who are yet to be born will be bound by this covenant. Right? Think about when you make a treaty. Right? You might have a particular president or even a particular king, depending upon where you are in history, and they make a treaty with the next country, and then that president leaves office or that king dies and someone else takes over. Do you have to create a new treaty with the new person? No. Right? Now, God, of course, is not going to leave office. God is, God for all time. But we will cycle through with new generations. And this is reminding us that even though those are new generations, those new generations will still be bound by the treaty, by the covenant that was already established for this relationship. And that was actually even ratified multiple times throughout our history as being willingly accepted by additional generations at different times. So the covenant goes on. Make sense? Okay, onward.
Well, you know that we dwelt in the land of Egypt, and that we passed through the midst of various other nations. And you have seen the detestable things and the fetishes of wood and stone,
We call idols.
silver and gold that they keep. Perchance there is among you some man or woman, or some clan or tribe, whose heart is even now turning away from the Lord our God to go and worship the gods of those nations. Perchance there is among you a stock sprouting poison weed and wormwood.
All right, so among the people, there might be people. You know the people, right? There's going to be people who think they don't have to do what the people are doing. They get to do what they want to do, because that's what kind of people they are. So this subgroup of people are going, yeah, that's right. We're all bound by the covenant. I want to get home so I can worship my idol. Right? They are outwardly showing that they are part of the group, but inwardly are they not. There's this question of how well is the covenant being accepted, and how well will the covenant be acted upon? And God is already saying through Moses here, I know there's going to be trouble. Right? The people are going to be part of my covenant forever, but people may not be. That is to say, the whole group, yes. Individuals of the group, we're going to have some trouble, I'm sure. Make sense? Okay, so let's just outline that a little bit, then we're going to get to our commentary. When such
a one hears the words of these sanctions, he may fancy himself immune, thinking, I shall be safe, though I follow my own willful heart, to the utter ruin of moist and dry alike.
All right, so moist and dry basically means you will cause damage to yourself and to others, and also you will cause damage to yourself even if you had been a good or righteous person up to this point. Right? You don't get to build up credit of good deeds that you can then spend by doing bad deeds, and you don't have to worry, nothing bad will happen until you drop below that negative line. That's not the way it works. Right? If I give $1 million in tzedakah and it's wonderful and amazing and I'm the most charitable, philanthropic person you ever saw, does that mean I get a free get out of jail card if I murder someone? No, of course not. Of course not, right? A bunch of good deeds does not give you license to commit bad deeds. And whether you are already bad or whether you're already good, in your heart, you're not allowed to start scheming about how you're going to game the system for being able to get away with what you think you're going to get away with. And just a little bit more to finish the paragraph.
The Lord will never forgive him. Rather will the Lord's anger and passion rage against that man, till every sanction recorded in this book come upon him, and the Lord blots out his name from under heaven.
Okay, now that when it says God will not forgive, that doesn't mean God wouldn't forgive. That means God will not forgive unless the person does tshuva. Right? God's not going to say, well, they used to be nice, or I really do like them, so even though they're doing something horrible, I'll overlook it. No. Right? God will actually be fair and honest. Now, if you repent, if you regret, you change your direction, then God, yes, will forgive. But God's not forgiving just because God wants to be forgiving. God only forgives when you are willing to be part of the covenant. You're willing to do your part of that arrangement. Make sense? All right, so this book seems to be rather important. And by the way, if you're wondering what all of the calamities are that are described in this book, the sanctions, we read them last week, and it was painful to listen to. If you didn't get a chance to come and listen, you can go back and reread it. But it is, like almost 60 verses of just absolute misery.
Yeah, it was fun in the shul.
Fun in the shul, yeah. Just
Reading through all.
calamity after calamity. Okay, 612. 612 out of 613. So we're going to look at the last two mitzvot that are found in the entire Torah. They're technically found in the next parasha of Vayelech, but we're not going to be here next week. I should have pointed that out earlier. No class next Wednesday, as the day after Rosh Hashanah, I won't have had time to prepare a lesson plan. So next Wednesday, no class. That means you also, can come to services on Monday and Tuesday without taking up more of your week time. So these are the last two mitzvot, by this count at least, that are found in the entire Torah. So let's see what they are. Do you mind still reading?
Number 612. We were commanded that the entire Israelite people is to assemble, men, women, and children, after the end of the year of Shemitah during the festival of Sukkot.
Right, so that's after the sabbatical year at the festival of Sukkot. It is time to have a public gathering for everyone. And by everyone, we mean the whole people, right? It's men, women, and children.
On the second of the festival, and to read a bit from the book of Deuteronomy for them to hear. Assemble the people, the men and the women, and the little ones. This precept is mentioned in the Talmud Kiddushin.
Okay, in the Talmud Kiddushin. Okay, but now they're going to talk about this. So the basic idea here is that in the early days of the Torah, God did not command that we would read the Torah every week publicly. He didn't command that we would read it on Shabbat. He didn't command that we would read it on Mondays and Thursdays. Those were later rabbinic enactments in order to try and give us more Torah more often so that we wouldn't mess up as much as we had been. But originally, it was like once every 7 years, you'd get the Torah announcement. And if you think that would have been nicer, well, we're going to see that maybe actually the way we've got it is definitely a benefit. Probably at least. So what is the Talmud's question about this, though, which is an interesting little query?
This precept is mentioned in the Talmud, yet there is assembly, which is a positive precept obligatory at a specific time, and women are duty bound to observe it.
All right, so why the rhetorical exclamation here? Right? Wait a minute. You're telling me that on a particular day, you have to do something. Well, that sounds to me like the definition of a positive, time-bound commandment. And according to rabbinic understanding of the mitzvot, if something is a positive, time-bound commandment, then women are not bound to do it. The classic example would be wearing tefillin, the arm and the head tefillin. Right? It is something that we do at a particular time. It is something that is a positive commandment. Thou shalt do it. Therefore, according to classic rabbinic understanding, women did not have to do it. They still were allowed to do it. They just were not commanded to do it. Now, that has changed as our socioeconomic situation has changed. As women now have more freedom and equality, they also get equal responsibilities. Yes, it's a double-edged sword. You don't just get privileges, you also get duties. And therefore, women are, in the conservative movement at the very least, considered obligated equally as men to all the commandments. But in the rabbinic time, that was not the case. Because women were also beholden to their family's obligations, they had a reduction of their obligations in these positive, time-bound actions. Everyone following that so far? So the question here is, this seems like it's a positive commandment. You will assemble. And it seems like it's a time-bound thing because it's on the second day of Sukkot. So why are women included, right? Or children for that matter? And the answer is?
It was explained then at the end of the discussion, specific conclusions are not to be learned from general rules. Thus, women are obligated by this precept.
So yes, in general, time-bound positive commandments are something for which women are exempt. In specific, however, you have to actually examine each commandment. You can't just use the general principle. This is a topic that often confuses a lot of people when they're engaging with Jewish law for the first time, because in American law, we like general legal principles. We like nice phrases, especially if they're in Latin. It's even better. Then we know that we've got a rule that can be followed without deviation. And Jewish law is what's known as casuistic law. It is all about the details and the specifics of the particular case or the specifics of the particular law. And therefore, in this particular case, the law of the assembly to hear the Torah being read is different as a rule than the rule that women are not obligated for time-bound positive commandments. So guess what, women? You're not off the hook for this one. You've got to be there for the assembly. Right? You don't get to stay home making lunch while the guys go off to hear Torah. We're all with us? Okay, onward.
At the root of the precept lies the reason that the entire essence of the Israelite people is the Torah.
All right, that should be a monumental statement. Right? The entire essence of the people of Israel is the Torah. Right? We might have been tempted to think that it was our biology. Right? After all, we have the whole book of Genesis leading up to the birth of Jacob and then his 12 sons, which establish themselves into this group of 70 people that become this bigger family. That seems to be an origin story of the Jewish people. It's all about the family tree. No, it's not. Right? Or you might think that it was about the historical experience, right? We were all there in Egypt. We were slaves, and then we were liberated, and then we were taken out by God. We have this shared history, this heritage, and the establishment of the state of Israel, the rise of our kings, the fall of our people. No. What makes us Israelites is not our shared history. It's not our biology. It's not our shared history. What makes us Israelite is the covenant, which we know about because of the Torah. Both know about and know what to do with, because we have the Torah. That is what makes us us. That is the defining element of our peoplehood. What so far? Good? Yes? Onward.
By it, they are set apart from every nation and tongue to gain merit to attain perpetual life, eternal bliss, than which there is nothing more supreme than that among the entities in creation.
All right. So we have this unique way. Doesn't mean others don't have different ways. Right? Others can also have a share in the world to come. They can have a share of life eternal. But our way of doing this is through the lens of Torah. And that is something which is sublime. Something that is what we gain from the Torah is unequaled by anything else in creation. And he's going to go and try and make that point a little bit more. Therefore,
since their entire main essence lies in it, it is fitting that all should assemble together at one particular time to hear its words, and that the excited chatter should go out among the entire people, men, women, and children, as they say, "What is this great gathering in which we've all been collected together?" The answer will be to hear words of the Torah, which is our entire essence, our glory and splendor.
All right, just think about what he's trying to say here for a minute. The people are all going to be gathered together because that's what the Torah told us to do. And when they gather together, they're going to want to know, why are we getting together? And when it's explained to them, the reason we're getting together is so we can hear the Torah, because the Torah is the essence of what it is to be our people, that this will be an excited chatter, right? It's like people getting together, tailgating before a big game, right? They will be, oh, wow, yeah, man, the game's going to be great today. It's like, oh, I can't wait to hear the Torah today. It's going to have that same almost jubilant atmosphere of this assembly. Because when you assemble people together to celebrate what makes them the people, that will make people excited. People like coming together. I mean, imagine the last time you went to a good 4th of July celebration, whether it be fireworks or a parade or something like that, and how good you felt being part of America, being part of the United States. Hopefully you did, or hopefully, if not, at a fireworks display, at some other occasion, you've come together with a group of people, not just sitting quietly at home, contemplating the greatness of being part of this nation, but with a group celebrating being part of this nation. And so too, this is something that can be affected only by having a mass assembly of everyone, so that the excitement will be infectious and it will rub off on one person to another. Because when you get a throng together, the throng has a certain vitality. Following the logic? Right. Rather than, this is again, he's subtly trying to explain why God didn't just say everyone should read this at home, but why it had to be a gathering. Keep going to see the effect.
As a result of this, they will come to tell of the greatness of its eminence and the glory of its work.
Wait a minute. Hold on. But here's the problem. As a result of the gathering, they will come to tell of its greatness, the eminence, the wonder. I mean, which if you've ever listened to someone who talked about the last football game they went to, right? They can't shut up about it. Right? It was an amazing game. The fans were this, the game was that, blah, blah, blah. But I thought that they were already going to have that feeling when they showed up. Right? If they show up and they're all celebrating, then what did the gathering add? Right? The gathering can't add that which the gathering depended upon. We're seeing how that seems to be like a circular logic. What do I start with? My enthusiasm or the gatherer? Both.
Oh, you kind of, it's like going to a show. You hope it's going to be good. You're kind of expecting it to be good.
Well, and you've probably heard the album before you went, right? If you're going to see a musical, we took the kids to see Evita when it was down at the Shakespeare just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and we played for them the album before we went, so that they would know the music, they know the story, and then they could actually see it. And my daughter especially hasn't stopped playing the album since we got back. So they were enthusiastic when we went, and we were building it up because we had been there, and they had the experience, which amped up their appreciation and understanding, which makes them more enthusiastic afterwards, and will hopefully lead them to a repeat, not necessarily just for the musical Evita, but in general for things like that. So you seed the activity with a certain amount of enthusiasm, usually from people who already have gained it from prior experience, so that it rubs off on those who are attending. And then those who attend, having had that mass experience, return with greater enthusiasm, which will feed back into the cycle year after year after year.
Right.
Follow the process? Excellent. Good. Onward.
Thus all will acquire a yearning for it in their heart, and with yearning for it they will learn to know the eternal Lord and will merit good reward. Then the Lord will rejoice in his handiwork. Psalms. It is, in substance, in keeping with what is written in explanation of this precept, and in order that they may learn and fear the Lord.
Right. So just in case you miss it, the Torah is not its purpose in and of itself. Right? The Torah is not a purpose in and of itself. It is ultimately meant to be our gateway to God. But we have to have the Torah to get that, because most of us aren't Moses. Right? We can't do it on our own. Most of us aren't Abraham. We can't do it on our own. We need this framework to bring us into the relationship with God. We need the covenant. We need this structure to carry us forward into that, not the covenant itself, but into the relationship which the covenant codifies. Following what I'm saying, right? It's like being, part of the covenant of the United States. It's, yes, that is a great thing to be a part of, and you should follow its laws, and you should be a good citizen. But part of doing that is in order to access what should be the great spirit of our nation and the relationship we have with each other. The United States being a mutual covenant as opposed to a hierarchical covenant. But in God's case, it's we go through the covenant of Torah, and that builds within us not just a love of Torah, but a love and understanding of God. Make sense? Okay, onward.
Among the laws of the precept, there is what the sages of blessed memory said, that it was the king who had the obligation to read aloud for them to hear. He would do the reading in the women's forecourt of the temple, and he would read while seated. Yet, if he read it standing, he would thus be praiseworthy.
Right, the king gets to sit down because he's the king, However, if the king chose to stand, it would be better, right? Because standing shows more humility of the king. Because being seated while doing something so important is his privilege because he's king. But by standing, he's showing that he is allowing himself to renounce that privilege in order to be humbler before God. And of course, the fact is that the king's reading it is specifically not to give him more honor, but to show that he is also included in the covenant, that he is not equal to God, but that he is one of us, linked to God through that same covenant and limited by that same covenant. Good. Next paragraph.
How would he do the reading? Trumpets were sounded throughout Jerusalem. A great platform made of wood would be brought, which would be erected in the middle of the women's forecourt, and the king would go and sit on it so that they could hear his reading. All the Israelites who came up on pilgrimage for the festival would gather around him. The Hazan of the Knesset would take the Torah scroll and give it to the head of the Knesset. He would give it to the assistant, that he would give it to the Kohen Gadol, and he would give it to the king in order to endow it with eminence amid the multitude of people. The king would accept it while standing, and if he wished, he would sit.
Okay, so in modern terms, this would be something like saying it was taken and passed from the president of the Senate to the Speaker of the House to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to the Vice President to the President, or in some order like that. President of the Senate and Vice President are the same. But it would be this idea that by passing it among the most honored and highest status people in the community, you are adding to the people's respect and awe of what's going on. Now, does it actually add to the Torah? Of course not. Right? The Torah doesn't get bigger and better just because famous people are holding it. It's like, ooh, Barbara Streisand's Torah.
Show.
But it makes a good show, and we are human beings, and we respond to a show. Right. If we all get together and there are trumpets and there's a big platform and there's a loud voice and there's a big ceremony, it does move us in a way that sitting at home in a dark room reading the book by ourselves with a flashlight doesn't do. It's one of the reasons why we have such elaborate and magnificent services for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur just around the corner, is because the services do help the service of the heart. It does help move us to do it. You might imagine I'm too sophisticated for all of that, but it's not true. If you've ever been caught up in any concert or caught up at a play or caught up in a sports event or any kind of group activity where you cheer or celebrate or clap or stand or feel moved in a way that you wouldn't if you were just on your own watching it on TV, then you understand why this was done in this way. And you should be glad that you're participating in a human activity and you're not, a computer. All right, we're almost to wrap up.
This precept is in effect when the Israelites are on their land.
Meaning when there is Israeli sovereignty over the land.
If someone transgressed this, whether a man or a woman, and did not come at this appointed time to hear the words of the Torah, and so to a king, if he did not wish to read aloud, they would disobey this positive precept, and their punishment would be very great. For this precept is a mighty pillar and a great glory in the Jewish religion.
All right, so you got to do it. You got to be there. And you can imagine what it would have been like to have the entire nation joining together for this one act every 7 years to celebrate the heart of our nation, the Torah, in order to re-solidify in our mind the beauty of the covenant, and therefore impress upon us the need to love and understand and connect with God. But there's one last mitzvah we have to talk about, which is going to be similar, and that's mitzvah 613.
We were commanded that every man in Israel should have a Torah scroll. If one wrote it with his own hand, he is thus very praiseworthy and beloved, as the sages of blessed memory said. If he wrote it, Scripture considers it for him as if he had received from Mount Sinai.
Right? So everybody should have a Torah. You should all have a Torah. Now, I'm guessing that most of you probably don't have an actual Torah scroll in your house. And as we're going to see, there are other ways around that. But the Torah seems to conclude with its final mitzvah its own self-perpetuation. And I've always thought that was a little unusual, or not unusual, but almost fitting is the better word, because what is the very first commandment in the Torah?
Be fruitful and multiply.
Be fruitful and multiply. Right? The very first commandment given to all of humanity is puravu, right? Be fruitful and multiply. And what is the final commandment? Be fruitful and multiply the Torah. Right? That the Torah too should be multiplied. Now, Torahs can't make themselves, right? It's not like you put 2 Torahs in the ark, you come back 9 months later and there are 3. They need to be produced, and that's what we're talking about here. So we finish with an act of continuation of the progeny, just like we began with the very first mitzvah being that as well. Onward.
But whoever does not find it possible to write it with his own hand should hire someone that should write it for him. About this it is written, now therefore write for yourselves this song and teach it to the Israelites. In other words, write for yourselves the Torah in which there is this song.
All right, so this is where we get the idea that we need to write this for ourselves. Now, if you can't write it for yourself, you hire someone, and indeed this is the way most people fulfill this mitzvah in the modern days. There will usually be opportunities for you to support the writing of a Torah. We had that about 11 years ago now, when we had the program here at TI. But most synagogues will, from time to time, have an opportunity to help write a Torah, which allows you to contribute and participate in this mitzvah. Now, why are we doing it?
At the root of the precept lies the reason that it is known about human beings that they carry out all their matters according to the preparation that is available to them.
All right, if you are going to do something, you prepare for it. And the better you prepare, the better you do it.
Therefore, he commanded us that every single Jew should have a Torah scroll ready about him, so that he can read it always, and he will not need to go for it to the home of his friends, in order that he may learn to fear the Lord. And thus he will know and come to understand his mitzvot, that are more precious and cherished than gold, even much fine gold.
All right, so this is trying to remind us of that wonderful human trait, which is if you have to delay, or you have to wait, or you have to ask someone else for help, your odds of following through go way down. Right? It's just so if you think, oh, I wonder what is it? Wait, what does the Torah say about this? Am I allowed to charge this much or that much? I'll ask my friend tomorrow. Chances are you're not going to ask your friend. Chances are you're just going to rely on what you think you already know, and chances are you're probably wrong. So this is trying to say you need to have it with you. You need to be familiar with it. You need to be comfortable with it. You need to be ready to use it so that it will actually be a guide for your life, because a book of the Torah sitting on the shelf is no good to anyone, except for bookshelf makers. So it needs to be accessible and used, but it has to be accessible before it can be used. Very pragmatic. Onward.
Now, we were commanded that every single one among the Israelites is to strive for this, even if his fathers have left him one, in order that the scrolls may increase in number among us, and we should be able to lend one of them to any person who will not gain the means to buy one, and also in order that everyone in Jewry should read in new scrolls, for fear that their spirit may become loath or wearied in reading the old scrolls that their fathers left them.
It's hard to read old books, right? Just in terms of the physical aspect of it. The parchment is yellowed, it may be brittle, the font is faded. It's hard to read from an old scroll. So you want people to be able to read from it easily, cleanly, and feel good about doing so. And you can never have too many, right? Even if you've already got one, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to make another one, and either use that one for yourself or loan or give it to someone else so that they'll have a copy, that there should be this proliferation of the copies of the Torah. It's quite funny that even though most of them are not Jewish Bibles, the Bible is the most published book in human history. So there are more copies of the Bible in more languages than any other book that's ever been printed. So we've kind of succeeded. It wasn't exactly our version, but it does seem like proliferation has caught on among others who have come into contact with this book.
Were these translated into Aramaic during most of Jewish history?
You mean, was the Torah translated into Aramaic?
Yes.
There were Aramaic translations, but first and foremost, the rule was to have a copy of the Torah. That is to say, the actual Hebrew Torah. Because the idea was that if you had a copy of the real Hebrew Torah, then at least you knew your copy was 100% accurate. Whereas translations and other versions, whether it be Aramaic or others, that was more prone to either error or interpretation, and you would then be relying on a second degree removed from it.
So if you translated this in, if it was like an Aramaic or English translation, it wouldn't technically be a fulfillment of the commandment?
It would not be a technical fulfillment of this commandment, correct. There's even some debate of whether or not having a book published like this, like the Chumash, is a fulfillment, or whether it has to be the actual Torah itself. Most authorities lead to it's the actual Torah itself, not just a Chumash, not just the bound book version, because the bound book version, there still are mistakes that can creep in, whereas a Torah is something that is more meticulously created and more meticulously corrected. So the whole idea is to have an accurate version of the covenant, an accurate version of the commandments. And the only way to ensure its accuracy is to just copy one to the next. Make sense?
Yeah. The if it's a side-by-side copy, it doesn't count?
It doesn't count as a scroll of the Torah. As the original book has to have no additions at all. Right now, you should have additional books. And that's actually what the next paragraph is about.
No further, my son, that even though the principal, essential obligation by the law of the Torah applies to nothing but a Torah scroll, there is no doubt that other volumes as well, that pose an explanation of the Torah, everyone should acquire according to ability for the reasons we stated, even if his fathers left him many of them.
You should have a Jewish library. Okay? You should have a Jewish library. And if you've got one book, then your kids should have 5 books. And if your kids have 5 books, your grandkids should have 20 books. Right? You should add to your understanding. And each person over their lifetime and over the generations should continue to increase the total amount of knowledge that is available to them, to their family, and for their understanding. And nowadays we're blessed. We are living in a great Jewish publication just promised land, where there are more Jewish publishers publishing more books than at any other time in our history. Most of them are good. Some of them are meh, but most of them are good. And most of them are infinitely cheaper than they ever would have been in the past. So you can get, copies of the Torah, you can get copies of the Talmud, copies of the commentaries of many different sages, many of whom were not even accessible to most people until very recently. All of these quite cheaply in beautiful volumes that have good translations and good explanations. You can also get much of this now online. You can go to the wonderful website safaria.org, which I have no problem and hesitation continuing to shill for, because it's a free site. So it's not like you have to pay for a subscription or anything. And they just have a ton. Obviously, all the classics, not only in the Hebrew, but also the translations. But so many of the less well-known books as well are available, all in Hebrew, and then many of which are also in translation. So there is now really no reason that anyone should ever not have access to the great wisdom of our sages and of our history. Let's just wrap it up then.
It applies in every place and every time for males, as they have the obligation of the study of the Torah, and so likewise to write it, but not the women.
Right. That doesn't mean women can't. It just means that women do not have the obligation. Again, according to classical rabbinic thinking in the modern days, yes, they would.
If someone transgresses this and does not write a Torah scroll, if it is possible for him in any way, whatever.
Right. So within your limits, if you can't write it, you can't write it. Right. You just can't write it yourself, and you don't have enough money to hire someone else to write it. Okay, then you're off the hook. But if you do have that possibility, then you've transgressed.
He disobeys this positive precept, and his punishment will be very great, as this is a causative factor leading one to learn the precepts of Torah, as we said. Whoever fulfills it, though, will be blessed, and he and his sons will grow wise, as it is written, write for yourselves this song and teach it to the Israelites. Blessed is.
Before we get to the epilogue for the book, right? Write for yourselves the song and teach it to the Israelites. Again, we're not writing this copy of the Torah just to have another copy of the Torah. We're writing the copy of the Torah because the Torah tells us about the covenant, which leads us to God. This is the causal chain that he's referring to at the very end there. So if you choose to take the Torah out of the equation, then that means you essentially erase the covenant, and that means you essentially erase the opportunity to come closer to God. And it all falls apart. So it does begin by actually having the book. If you don't have the book, all the other steps will never fall into place. So making sure that you've got a copy is rather central. Right? Good. And then we get this lovely little epilogue.
Blessed is he who gives vigor to the weary or strength to the weary. And for the one bereft of strength, he increases vitality.
So I've often wondered whether this final line of Sefer HaChinuch is really trying to say, I just finished writing explanations for 613 mitzvot. Thank you, God, for giving me the strength to get through this. I can't imagine that this was an easy book to write. It is quite lengthy, but he made it all the way through, and the contribution of his insights are incredible.
I say with that whole chapter of Isaiah was to offer his commentary is offering great comfort.
Yes.
It's, comfort. This is great comfort to have this, especially in exile.
Yes.
To have these words of encouragement.
And that was, I believe, the main purpose why the author of Sefer HaChinuch, which we technically don't know who the original author was, wrote his book, was to help make it clear what the mitzvahs were in their basic form, and to make clear why we were doing them, at least within a general understanding. Obviously, there's always more to learn, but that's why we keep meeting each week. All right, thank you all very much. Again, no class next Wednesday. And there is, of course, going to be class for, not class, but there are services for Rosh Hashanah. There are also services this regular Shabbat, right? Friday night, Saturday. Then services for Rosh Hashanah begin Sunday night, Monday night, and Tuesday. And then we're off next Wednesday from class. And then Shabbat services, followed by Yom Kippur and everything else. Check the emails, website, all the other bits for schedules. Good. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Have you heard of the book, Rabbi, the book, The Living Torah?
The Living